This is part 5 of a series on the 2017 UK general election, which will give a brief overview on the issues surrounding the environment, energy and climate change in the United Kingdom, and follow up with the policies proposed by each party. Central issues here are air pollution and the UK's sources of energy. The UK is currently in the midst of a pollution crisis caused by diesel vehicles emitting harmful levels of nitrogen dioxide into the atmosphere, which contributes to about 50,000 early deaths and £28 billion in costs each year. The government has been in breach of nitrogen dioxide limits since 2010, and in 2015 they were sued by Client Earth over their failure to address the problem. In a unanimous verdict, the Supreme Court ruled against the government and ordered them to draw up a pollution clean-up plan by the end of 2015. In December 2015, the plans were released, and in November 2016, the government was sued again and lost again, with the High Court ruling that the plan drawn up in response to the first Supreme Court decision was so poor as to be unlawful. Court documents released during the case revealed that the government had blocked proposals for 16 clean air zones and changes to vehicle excise duty due to concern over political impact for the Conservative Party. The High Court ordered them to produce a second plan. On the 6th of January 2017, London breached its annual pollution limit in just 5 days, and in April 2017 the government found itself in court case number 3, this time in an attempt to delay the publishing of their second air pollution plan until after the snap election, saying that it was complete but controversial and might cause a public backlash against the Conservative Party. In 0 for 3, the High Court ruled against the government and the plans were published by court order a week later. The second plan was not well received, and it has been described as an attempt to pass the buck to local government whilst denying it the powers councils need to act. A class action lawsuit on behalf of asthma sufferers over the government's repeated failures to clean up illegal levels of air pollution is expected to go ahead in 2017. Energy in the United Kingdom is also on the verge of crisis. Just over half of the UK's domestic electricity production comes from fossil fuels, which is now predominantly gas. About 1/5 is nuclear from 15 reactors, and 1/4 is renewable. Coal, which has been in steady decline since the late 1980s, has suffered an abrupt collapse over the last 5 years, as it struggles to compete with cheap renewables and shale gas from fracking. The UK is considered the best location for wind power in all of Europe, and wind has grown rapidly to 12% of all sources and half of all renewables in 2016. However, the UK government opposes onshore wind power and attempted to end subsidies for the technology in 2016. The UK also has a high reliance on imported energy, accounting for about 38% of the UK's energy consumption in 2015, with most of this supplied by the EU or Norway, which is a member of the European Customs Union. So how do the parties compare in their policies on the environment, energy and climate change? The Conservatives will produce a 25-year environment plan and address poor air quality by planting 1 million more trees in towns and cities. They plan to have the lowest energy costs in Europe and say that the way to achieve this is with a diverse energy mix, which includes new investment in fossil fuels, makes no mention of renewables and, curiously, rejects wind power. They've called fracking in the United States an energy revolution that drives economic growth and pushes down prices, and believe that it will do the same thing for Britain. The authority to regulate fracking will also be transferred from various environmental and health agencies to a new shale environmental regulator, which will allow decisions on fracking to be made more swiftly. Regarding climate change, the Conservatives resolve to continue meeting the legally binding target set out in the 2008 Climate Change Act, reducing emissions by 80% from 1990 levels by 2050, and will remain signatories to the Paris Agreement. The Green Party would introduce an Environmental Protection Act and a Clean Air Act to promote biodiversity, sustainable food production and clean air zones. They would also introduce deposit return schemes to reduce plastic and other waste, fine car manufacturers involved in the Volkswagen emissions scandal, strengthen protections for the Greenbelt, national parks, sites of special scientific interest and areas of outstanding natural beauty, and protect marine areas around the UK coast with no-take zones. The Green Party would stop government subsidies to fossil fuels, replace fracking, coal and nuclear power stations with renewable energy, strengthen the global deal on climate change by promoting ecologically sustainable development in poorer countries, and follow targets set out in the Paris Agreement to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Labour would introduce a Clean Air Act, retrofit diesel buses to Euro 6 standards in areas with the most severe air quality problems, and plant 1 million trees to promote biodiversity and better food management. They would also safeguard marine habitats with bluebelt areas, establish a science innovation fund to work with farmers and fisheries, set targets for plastic bottle deposit schemes and protect bees by banning neonicotinoid pesticides. On energy, Labour plans to deliver affordable nuclear and renewable energy by taking production back into public ownership, prioritising access to tariff-free energy from Europe, and will put a ban on fracking, saying that investment would increase the UK's dependency on fossil fuels. Labour would meet the legally binding targets in the 2008 Climate Change Act and say they will put the UK back on track to limiting warming to 1.5 degrees as outlined in the Paris Climate Agreement. The Liberal Democrats would pass 5 green laws to incorporate EU environmental protections into UK law and hold the government accountable to these targets by establishing a Cabinet Committee on Sustainability and an Office for Environmental Responsibility. They would ban the sale of diesel cars and small diesel vans by 2025, introduce a diesel scrappage scheme, provide tax incentives for buying electric vehicles, and mandate that all vehicles in urban areas run on ultra-low or zero-emission fuels within 5 years. They would also establish a statutory waste recycling target of 70% in England and extend separate food waste collections to at least 90% of homes by 2022, introduce a 5p charge on disposable coffee cups, and suspend the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. They would expand the use of renewable energy, aiming to generate 60% of electricity from renewables by 2030, and invest heavily in the research and development of new energy technologies, including energy storage, hydrogen, and offshore wind and tidal power. They support existing nuclear power but will not subsidise new builds, and strongly oppose fracking, citing its adverse environmental and climate impacts. The Liberal Democrats would remain signatories to the Paris Climate Agreement, reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2040 and then to zero by 2050, and implement a carbon capture and storage programme. Plaid Cymru would establish a national electric vehicle charging network, reduce plastic waste with a deposit return scheme, and oppose the construction and use of pylons in national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. They would transfer the responsibility over Welsh energy generation and natural resources to the National Assembly, increase the energy generated from renewables including tidal lagoons in Swansea Bay, Cardiff Bay and Colwyn Bay, and create a Welsh energy company to undercut private providers and lower costs. Plaid Cymru would also introduce a new Climate Change Act to build on EU standards and set undisclosed new greenhouse gas reduction targets for 2030 and 2050. The Scottish National Party aimed to recycle 70% of all of Scotland's waste by 2025 and bring an end to municipal biodegradable waste being sent to landfill by 2020. 60% of Scotland's electricity currently comes from renewables, and the SNP are on target to deliver 100% of Scotland's electricity from renewables by 2020. They will continue to block fracking and underground coal gasification in Scotland and oppose the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant in the south of England, citing the cost of the project. The Scottish National Party also propose a new climate change bill that puts the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement into binding UK law and aim to reduce Scotland's emissions by more than 50% by 2020, in addition to carefully considering proposals to set a target of 50% of all energy to come from renewables by 2030. The UK Independence Party would introduce a new Environmental Protection Act which would keep EU environmental legislation that can be shown to have no detrimental effects and continue to make available the agriculture sector funds formerly provided by the EU. They would prioritise protecting the countryside, including woodlands, habitats and green spaces, and consider a plastic bottle deposit scheme to encourage recycling. To tackle pollution, UKIP support a diesel scrappage scheme where owners are encouraged to trade in diesel vehicles for discounts on electric or hybrid models. However, they oppose punitive financial incentives like emission zone charging or higher taxes on polluting vehicles. They will invest in coal, oil, gas and fracking, as well as nuclear and renewables, in order to provide low-cost energy. However, they will not allow fracking in national parks or other areas of outstanding natural beauty. They plan to further reduce household energy bills by scrapping taxes on polluters known as green levies. UKIP would repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act, saying it has no basis in science, and calls its aim of cutting greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050 unachievable. They would also withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Agreement and withdraw from the EU Emissions Trading Scheme to enhance the UK's industrial competitiveness. Thank you to the following patrons who supported this video. If you'd like to contribute, please check out the link and consider donating $1 or more toward the production of future content. The final video in this series will take a look at the polls and discuss likely outcomes of the election.